Hi, and welcome to The Dreaming Scientist, a quiet place in deep space with softly spoken science for your sleepy minds. Tonight we meet the Neanderthals, humans built for cold valleys and long winters. We will see who they were, when they lived, and how their strength, skill, and courage kept families warm and fed in a hard world. We will walk through their tools and fire, their hunts, their care for elders and children, and the quiet signs of meaning in caves and camps. We will also touch on how they met people like us, shared a small part of their genes, and slowly faded from the map. But before you do that, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down below where you are watching from. It is always intriguing to know who is watching us from around the world. And thank you so much for being here. Neanderthals were humans like us, but shaped by a colder, harder world. They lived across Europe and Western Asia for a very long time, from more than 400,000 years ago until about 40,000 years ago. Picture wide valleys with steppe grass, scattered pines and birch, wind carving drifts of snow in winter, and herds of large animals moving with the seasons. That was their home. Their bones show strong bodies with broad chests, thick limbs, and wide hips. Their faces had heavy brow ridges and a long, low skull, yet their brain size was on average like ours, sometimes even a bit larger. This does not mean they thought exactly as we do, but it does tell us they had space for complex minds. Their noses were big and the sinuses deep, which likely warmed and moistened cold air before it reached the lungs. Their bodies were shorter and stockier than many modern people, which helped them keep heat. Think of them as built for power and for the slow grind of life outdoors in Ice Age weather. They made fire, shaped stone tools, wore hides, and knew the ground better than any map could show. They learned the trails of bison and horse, the winter dens of bear, the crossing points where rivers ran shallow after frost. They were not a brief branch. They were a long chapter. While glaciers grew and shrank again and again, they stayed, moved, adapted, and raised children. Their range stretched from the Atlantic coasts to mountains in Central Europe, through the Balkans, down into the Levant, and east almost to the Altai. In caves and rock shelters we find their hearths, stone flakes, ash, bone with cut marks, and sometimes layers of trampled floor that tell us where they sat, slept, and worked. They were not primitives in rags. They were experts in their own world. If you could stand in a valley they knew, you would smell wood smoke, see a careful ring of stones around a fire, and watch skilled hands break rock with quiet control to make tools sharp enough to skin a deer in minutes. Their timescale was not ours. A good flint outcrop might serve a band for many generations. A shelter with a dry rear chamber might be used for centuries as herds came and went. Across this deep time, Neanderthals solved the same problems every parent, hunter, and maker faces. Keep warm, feed the group, care for the young and the old, learn and teach. The most striking thing about them is not how different they were, but how steady and capable they were in a world that would exhaust most of us within a single week. Everything about the Neanderthal body speaks of strength. Their bones are thick, with large areas where muscles attach. The long bones of the arms and legs show heavy ridges and wide ends, a record of constant load. Their hands were broad, with strong thumbs, built to grip and twist. Their shoulders sat a little higher and more forward than in many modern people, good for powerful swings and for holding a heavy spear steady. Their ribcage was wide and deep, giving room for strong lungs. Their pelvis was broad and sturdy. They carried weight the way a worker carries a tool they use every day. This did not come only from birth. it also came from life. To live as they did meant hauling wood, dragging carcasses, lifting stones, and moving camp gear again and again. It meant hiking uneven ground in winter boots made of hide, pushing through snow, wading cold streams, and climbing slopes with hands and feet to reach good flint ledges. Their injuries tell a story as well. Many adult skeletons show healed breaks in ribs and arms, and spinal wear from heavy work. Yet they healed because others cared for them, and because their own bodies repaired under steady food and rest by the fire. In the chest and leg bones of hunters, we see the marks of lung and leg power earned by distance and work. This is not the gym. This is a life where every task is physical and done in cold air with layers of hide and sinew laces. Their teeth show heavy use too. The front teeth are often worn flat, likely from clamping hides to hold them while hands scraped and softened the leather. That makes sense if you picture someone standing in low light near a cave mouth, hide in the teeth, scraper in the hand, working a seam smooth for clothing. Their strength was not only brute force, it was skilled strength. To knap flint with control, you need a calm hand and perfect timing, striking near an edge with just the right angle to peel a long flake. To thrust a spear into a moving bison, you need timing and perfect footwork on icy ground. To bring a heavy quarter of meat back to camp without falling, you need balance and patience. Their bodies were tools sharpened by thousands of days like this, and their mind and body worked together to make all that power useful and quiet rather than wild and wasteful. In short, they were not only strong, they were strong in a way that fit their world so well that the world itself became their gym and their teacher. Neanderthals made fine stone tools using a method that shows careful planning. They shaped a core with prepared edges, then struck flakes of set size and shape from it. This is called the prepared core method, and it lets you make many sharp flakes quickly in the field. From these flakes they made scrapers, points, knives, and toothed-edge tools. They hafted points onto wooden shafts with sinew and plant fibers. In some sites we find traces of birch tar, a sticky glue they made by heating birch bark without air. That is not easy. It means they learned to control fire and to make ovens or pits that keep smoke and heat in and air out. They made spears of wood as well, shaped and fire-hardened, used for thrusting at close range and likely for short throws. They tended fire with skill. Hearths in caves show repeated use, ash cleaning, and layers of charcoal. Some hearths are set in lines across a shelter, as if different groups had their sleeping and working spots. Fire gave them cooked meat, warm nights, light for tool work, and protection from animals. They wore clothing made of hides. We do not have the hides, but we have the tools for scraping and piercing, and the wear on teeth and hands that comes from hide work. In cold wind, a layered set of hide wrap, fur in, fur out, and a belt of twisted sinew can keep a person warm even below freezing. For feet there were soft boots tied with thongs and filled with dry grass for insulation. In camps near caves, we see piles of bones sorted by part and species, as if butchers brought in the best cuts and left heavy parts near the kill. We also see tools carried long distances, showing that they knew the best stone sources and planned trips to fetch good rock. They did not waste effort. A single good core could make many flakes. A dull flake could be resharpened. A broken point could be turned into a scraper. Every bit of sinew, marrow, and hide had a use. This craft was their shield. Cold, wind, and snow were facts, not enemies, because they had routines that worked, in the spark of a fire steel on stone, in the smell of birch tar, in the soft scrape of a hide over a log, and in the firm click of a flake coming free from a core. You can hear how they managed risk. Skill was their wealth. They learned it as children at the knees of elders and kept it polished for life. No factories, no written plans, only memory, eye, hand, and a culture of practice that made every camp a small school. Their food tells us what kind of life they lived. Cut marks on bones show they butchered large animals: bison, horse, red deer, reindeer, sometimes rhinoceros and mammoth when chance allowed. The breaks in long bones show they cracked them for marrow, a rich fat to go with lean meat. The wear on stone scrapers shows hide work after a kill, because a hide must be processed fast before it stiffens in cold air. Chemical traces in Neanderthal bones point to a diet rich in meat, the kind of pattern seen in top predators. But this does not mean they ate only meat. Bits of charred plant, seeds, nuts and tubers appear in some sites. Traces stuck in dental plaque show plant starches and even herbs with bitter notes that may have been used for flavor or for simple health. At coasts and rivers, they gathered shellfish and fish. In caves by the sea, we find layers rich in shells with clear-cut marks on fish bones and signs of roasting. In the south, where winters were softer, they took turtles and rabbits too. Their hunting seems to have been close and coordinated. Many spears are shaped for thrust rather than long throws, and many adult skeletons show injuries like those seen in rodeo riders, the kind you get when you get close to big animals. That suggests they used the land to trap or slow prey, driving herds into snow, against steep ground, or into swampy patches where a fast animal loses footing. They watched wind and waited downwind. They struck where the herd had to pass. They knew when a river ice bridge was firm and could carry a charging beast, and when it would break under weight, and they used that knowledge. This kind of hunting needs teamwork and quiet signals. It needs people who know each other, who trust that the person at their side will step when they step and hold when they hold. It also needs care after the hunt. A kill far from camp means heavy loads. They likely butchered on the spot, carried prime cuts and fat, and left lower value parts. They cached meat in cold air or snow. In caves, we see zones where meat was cut, zones where hides were worked, zones where fire burned long and hot for boiling and roasting, and zones at the back where people slept. They were not wasteful. Hoof and antler became tools, sinew became thread, hides became clothes and bedding, bones became awls and points. Ash went into tanning. In a world where every calorie took work, nothing was left to rot without a reason. All of this shows a mind tuned to the land and a body trained to turn chance into food. Their strength was not only in muscle, it was in reading a track, in knowing a snow crust would hold or fail, in hearing a herd hours before it came into view, and in staying still in cold wind until the right moment arrived. Neanderthals were not lone hunters. They lived in bands, and the band looked after its own. We know this because skeletons show healed injuries that would have been crippling for weeks or months. Broken arms, crushed ribs, serious infections, and worn joints. Many of these people lived long enough to heal. That means others brought them food, kept them warm, and moved camp at a pace they could bear. The old were not thrown aside. Teeth worn flat from years of use show elders who still sat by the fire and taught. Children left tiny footprints near hearths and at cave mouths. Small hands made small flakes, likely in practice. There is also evidence that they marked special moments. In some caves we find burials where the body is placed, not dropped, where the head rests on a stone, or the body is arranged in a shallow pit. In a few sites, red mineral powder appears near bones, as if colour mattered at a farewell. Simple ornaments turn up too. A string of eagle talons with wear marks shows it once hung and tapped against skin. Shells with pigment traces and holes drilled near the edge suggest necklaces or decoration. Feathers from raptors were taken for the shafts. but also for the dark, glossy wing quills. We cannot ask them what these meant, but we can say they cared about more than meat and wood. They cared about signs and looks, and the feel of objects kept and worn. In one deep cave, long before modern humans reached the area, broken stalagmites were stacked in rings near a small fire, far from daylight. That is not shelter work. That is the choice to go deep, to make a shape, to light a fire in the dark. In their living spaces, we see tidy edges to hearths, placements that repeat across seasons, and patterns in the discard piles that suggest an order to tasks. They had words too, almost certainly. Their throat bones include a small bone like ours that helps a tongue make sounds, and their ears were tuned to the same range of tones that carry speech well. Their genes include work for the wiring that helps speech and language. They lived by teaching and talk, so they must have told stories and given names. Their way of life was powerful not only in body but in culture. How to make tar, how to twist sinew, how to sit out a storm, how to treat a fever, how to calm a child, how to honor the dead. These are human skills, and they had them. Modern humans like us reached the lands of Neanderthals roughly between 60 and 45,000 years ago, moving out from Africa through the Levant and into Europe and Western Asia. The meeting was not one day. It was many waves, many valleys, many winters. The record shows two things clearly. First, there was contact and children. People today whose ancestors lived outside Africa carry a small share of Neanderthal genes, usually 1 to 2%. These genes touch skin, hair, immune defenses, fat storage, and even how we react to some viruses. In parts of Asia and Oceania, people also carry genes from another close group called Denisovans, who were cousins of Neanderthals in the East. This tells us the meeting was not only conflict, it was also mixing. Second, the Neanderthals as a distinct line faded by about 40,000 years ago. Why? There is no single cause carved in stone. Think of many pressures at once. The climate swung hard around that time, with cold pulses that made forest and steppe shift in only a few centuries. That sort of shift can break the routes that herds use and the timing bands depend on. Small, spread-out groups are fragile under such stress. Add competition for the same prey with new bands of modern humans who used lighter thrown spears, longer networks for trade, and perhaps larger group ties, and the margin thins. Add rare but real disease exchange between groups who had been apart for long ages, and some bands may have suffered more than others. Over several thousand years, those small losses add up. Yet they did not vanish without a trace. Part of them lives in us, in bits of DNA that helped our ancestors survive cold, altitude, or sickness in new lands. Part of them lives in the skills we still use when we build fire, dress a hide, shape a blade, or read a track. And part of them lives in our sense of kinship when we look into a cave and see the circle of stones around a hearth and feel, in a simple, deep way, that people like us sat there. Their strength was not a myth. It was the daily truth of moving meat across snow, of lifting logs, of holding a line against a charging beast. Their way of life feels out of this world to us because our world is easy by their standards. But in their world, they were masters. They kept families warm through deep winters, fed growing children, healed the hurt, and kept a culture alive for hundreds of thousands of years. That is a kind of success almost beyond our modern idea of time. It deserves quiet respect. To understand Neanderthals, picture the year not by months on a wall, but by signs on the ground. Spring was the smell of wet soil and the first shoots along a sunny bank. Summer was reindeer passing north, horse herds grazing on open steppe, berries dark on low shrubs. Autumn was fat on bison and red deer, nuts dropping in beech woods, streams running low and clear. Winter was crusted snow, ice on river edges, low sun, and the quiet crunch of cold underfoot. Neanderthals read this year like a book. They did not wander without plan. They moved between places that fed and sheltered them. Caves and rock ledges were used again and again when winds were sharp or storms were heavy. In open country, they picked rises that caught morning sun and faced away from the worst wind. Stones set in arcs and patches of packed earth hint that they built windbreaks of poles and hides, simple but enough to turn a biting gust into a bearable breeze. They watched animal trails. A pass where herds funneled between hills in early summer became a hunting ground. A river bend with shallow crossings and willow thickets became a place to fish and cut straight chutes for spear shafts. A south-facing slope with birch and pine gave dry wood even in snow. They knew where flint and chert lay in the rock and shaped pieces at the source so they did not carry waste. They left caches along their paths, a good core under a flat stone, a spare scraper in a crevice, dry kindling under an overhang. Children learned these places as part of who they were, the way you know your way home without a street sign. When cold grew deep, they tightened their circle. Fires were kept smaller to save fuel. Meat was smoked or dried near the roof of a shelter where heat gathered. Footpaths were beaten into the snow between hearths, latrine pits, and wood piles so you could walk by feel in the dark. In milder years, bands met and traded at the edges of ranges. A flint from far away shows up in a cave where no such stone exists. A shell from a warm coast lies in inland ash. These are signs of ties beyond the family fire, ties that carry news and mates and skills. Neanderthals were not trapped by the ice. They were shaped by it. Their year was a chain of known moves that turned hard ground into a home. When the wind shifted, they shifted. When a river broke its banks, they knew the high path that stayed dry. When snow sealed the forest, they followed the open steppe. This calm practice, more than anything, explains their long success. They did not fight the year, they worked with it. Stone lasts, so we find many stone tools. Wood, cord, and glue rot, so we find only traces. But those traces are clear enough to show a deep craft. Neanderthals chose straight young trunks for spear shafts and seasoned them by the fire so they would not warp. They carved points with stone flakes and hardened the tips in heat so the surface grew tougher. They split antler and bone into wedges and smoothers. They twisted sinew into thread that shrank as it dried, pulling a binding tight like a clamp. They used plant fibers as cord. On a few rare tools, a tiny spiral of twist still marks where fiber once held a stone to a shaft. They made glue from birch bark by heating it without air, a tricky job that needs a covered pit or a tight stone box to keep smoke in and oxygen out. The black pitch that drips out is sticky, strong, and water resistant. Press a stone point onto a wooden shaft with this pitch, bind with sinew, and you have a tool that can take a heavy blow and not slip. A find of a smooth stick with a rounded end shows they also made digging tools, useful for roots, tubers, and setting poles. Charred boards with scrape marks show they planed and thinned wood for handles. Even the way they broke stone speaks of planning. Many cores show the prepared core method, where you first shape the lump to control the flakes you will take later. That is thought before action, a plan you hold in mind as you turn and strike. They used pigments like red ochre not only for colour on skin or object, but also likely to dry hides, protect bindings, and mark tools for ownership or task. If you have ever tried to sew leather with a bone awl, you know it takes rhythm and hand strength. Wear on Neanderthal awls shows long hours of pushing holes through thick hide. Their teeth were tools too, often worn flat at the front from clamping a strip of leather while both hands scraped it. Each of these acts is simple. Together, they are a system of craft. Choose the right tree, season the shaft, shape the point, make the glue, bind with sinew, dress the hide, tie the seam. None of it ends up in a museum case as a full spear with a bright tip and a fine grip, because time eats wood and cord. But the marks in cave floors, the polish on bone, the pitch lump stuck to stone, and the strain lines on thumb bones tell the story anyway. This hidden craft is why their gear worked in sleet, why their hands stayed warm inside thick mitts, why their tools did not fall apart when a hunt turned rough. Fire was more than heat. It was home, tool shop, lamp, kitchen, doctor, and guard. Neanderthals placed hearths with care, so smoke rose toward cracks and the warm zone spread where people sat. They banked coals under ash at night, so a morning spark came with a breath and a twig. When they moved camp, they carried an ember in a bark cup, or lit a new fire with stone on stone, steel-hard minerals striking bright. A hearth in a cave told you where to work and where to sleep. The front was for butchering and heavy scraping where light was good. The sides were for stitchers and carvers whose hands knew the job without watching every stroke. The rear was for bedding, hides over evergreen boughs to keep cold ground from stealing heat. Fire-hardened spear tips and straightened shafts. Fire drove the smoke that kept biting insects away in summer and kept predators shy in winter. At night, a ring of coals made a low wall of light that let eyes rest. They cooked in many ways. Meat roasted on spits, turned and basted with fat. Ribs propped by stones became a hot plate. Heated stones dropped into a skin bag of water made a boil without a pot, a method old as fire itself. Fish lay on a wet plank and steamed under a roof of leaves and bark. Roots and tubers baked in ash, then peeled and eaten soft. In caves with old soot layers on ceilings, we see the price of warmth. Lungs that took in smoke day after day. Their sinuses were large and their chests wide, and maybe that helped move air through the haze. They knew to burn dry wood for a cleaner flame and to open both ends of a shelter for a pull of air. When someone coughed hard, herbs with sharp smells may have been burned to open the chest. When a cut was deep, hot water cleaned it, and heat sealed a binding of sinew and hide. Fire made time in the dark safe for work and talk. A story told by firelight holds a group in one mind. A song teaches a rhythm for scraping a hide. A chant times blows when many arms lift a log. Fire also taught respect. Sparks took hair or hide in an instant. Dry grass at the cave mouth could flare. Children learned early to stand back, to move slow, to hold a stick far from its burning end. In old ash we see seeds from plants that only open with heat. Maybe some of those seeds were gathered after a brush fire, roasted by chance and found sweet. Fire was always present. Its light shone on tools, on faces, and on walls where shadows danced while hands worked. It is easy to forget that without light from a fire, a winter day is short and a cave is dark. For Neanderthals, the hearth extended the day, held the group together, and turned cold stone into a home. We often hear that Neanderthals ate only meat. The ground says more. Scraps in their dental plaque show starch grains from grasses, roots, and seeds. Charred bits in hearths match nuts and legumes. On coasts and rivers, piles of shells with cut marks on fish bones show regular use of water foods. In warm places, tortoise shells with burn marks tell of slow roasting. This wider diet matters for health and for planning. Fat and protein give power in cold, but plants give fiber, vitamins, and variety. A winter broth made from bones and marrow, thickened with crushed seeds, warms from within. A root pounded and baked becomes sweet. Sour berries make fat meat easier to eat. Nuts ground with a stone and mixed with fat and ash water can make a paste that keeps for days. There is even a hint of simple medicine. Traces of bitter plants that calm pain and fight germs show up in plaque on teeth from a person who had a bad mouth infection. Perhaps an elder knew which twig to chew when a tooth throbbed or a belly was sour. The kitchen was wherever the fire sat. A flat stone became a griddle. A split branch became tongs. A bent green limb became a hook. A hide sling with hot stones in it simmered stew. Children learned to sit where sparks would not leap, to turn meat without piercing it so juices stayed in, to pull stones from a boil with 2 sticks and not a hand, to wrap a root in wet leaves before burying it in coals. Hunting days were long, but food days were longer. Meat had to be cut, dried, smoked, stored. Hides had to be scraped and softened, or they would harden like boards. Bones had to be cracked, and the marrow eaten before cold made it brittle and hard to get. Plant foods took time too. Seeds needed to be winnowed. Roots needed to be dug with sticks and washed where water ran clear. There was no waste. Bones became tools. Skin became clothing and bedding. Sinew became thread. Even ash had its place, rubbed into hides to help loosen hair or mixed with water to rinse grease. Fish oil lit a wick for a moment of extra light. Kitchen skills are quiet and do not leave dramatic marks, but without them a band would fail. The proof that they were masters sits in the steady layers of ash and bone, in the rhythm of cut marks, and in the fact that they grew children who reached adult strength and elders whose joints show long use. A weak kitchen cannot do that in an ice age. Theirs did. To live as Neanderthals did, you need a mind that holds a plan and a hand that can teach it. A prepared core for making flakes is not luck. You must picture the flake you want before you strike it. You must remember where your people found the best stone a day's walk away. You must teach a child to judge when a flake edge needs quick retouch and when to throw it aside. This is memory, foresight, and shared method. Their ears were tuned to the range of sounds that carry speech well, and a small bone in the throat that helps a tongue-shaped sound looks like ours in bones we have found. Their genes carry changes that, in us, help the brain wire for language. This does not prove they spoke as we do today, but it makes a simple point. Talking would have helped them, and their bodies could support it. In a hunt, you need quiet words and signs. In camp, you need names for tools and places. In teaching, you need words for thick, thin, softer, harder, turn, stop, now. A vocabulary grows from shared work. Stories follow because stories are how people remember more than a list. A story tells you not only where the herd passed, but how the wind smelled, how the ice sounded, what the sky looked like when it began to snow in the night. Songs and rhythms teach timing for group work. Call and response keeps children close on a dark walk. These are simple needs and simple answers, but they add up to a culture held in voices. We can also see planning in long trips to fetch stone and in the way sites were used. A band did not stumble onto a cave by chance each winter. It returned to one that held smoke well and stayed dry under thaw. It kept a list of tasks in its head as it walked. Gather pitch at the birch stand, cut willow for shafts, look at the fox den to see if it is active, check the river crossing, glance at the sky for the line of geese to know if the season is early or late. A mind that lives outdoors this way grows wide and deep like the valley it knows. Elders were libraries. Their teeth say they lived long enough to pass many winters. Their bones say they healed after hard breaks. That means their words had time to shape younger lives. A young hand learns a nap, not by a single show, but by many days of small corrections. Move the stone here. Lift your wrist. Strike near the edge. Breathe. Listen to the ring. The sound of a good blow is a lesson. The feel in the fingers when a flake peels just right is a lesson. A mind stores those and calls them up without a name when needed. This is human learning. Neanderthals had it. The Ice Age was not a safe place. Cave lions, hyenas and bears shared the land with Neanderthals and hunted the same herds. Teeth marks on bones and claw rakes on skulls tell of close calls. So do fractures like those seen in people who ride animals or work with large stock today. A forearm broken by a fall while dragging meat. Ribs cracked by a horn. A crushed foot from a rolling boulder on a slope of frost-loosened stones. Many of these healed. Someone splintered them. Someone carried the hurt person to shelter. Fire kept watch while they slept. When the injured woke at night, someone was close. Food rich in fat and broth from bones gave the body what it needed to mend. This is not a guess. The ridges where muscles attach are strong in old healed bones, a sign that people went back to work after recovery. Some skeletons show people who lived years with limited use of a limb or with a blind eye. They lived because those around them made up the difference. Care was not a soft luxury, it was a plan. A band with elders and people who knew how to render fat, red a cloud, or find dry fuel after a storm had an edge. They were worth the food they ate while they healed because they made the band stronger with skills and memory. Risk was managed, not ignored. Hunts used land to trap prey. Campsites were chosen with clear lines of sight. Fires were kept banked when wind rose. Children stayed near the center of the group at night. People posted themselves where a cave narrowed so a bear could not push through without taking a spear to the chest. Courage was quiet. It was not a shout and a charge. It was standing your ground with numb hands while a bison tested the line. It was holding a spear steady when a boar turned. It was walking out into deep cold to bring back wood because a child coughed and the fire had to burn hot. Their strength was not only in muscle but in nerve, patience and care. They were not superhuman, they were human, living at the edge of what a human can carry and still choose to share, to teach, and to keep a small circle of light burning against a long winter. A Neanderthal child was born into a world of cold air, bright fire, and steady work. From the first days, that child felt thick hides, smelled smoke and pine resin, and heard the soft click of stone as adults shaped tools. Care began at once. A baby rode close against a chest under a fur wrap, so breath stayed warm and steady. Older hands rubbed tiny feet to keep blood moving in deep winter. Milk was the first food, then broths rich with fat, then soft bits of roasted meat and mashed roots. By the time a child could walk, small tasks began. Pick up dry twigs. Carry a folded hide from one side of the shelter to the other. Sit by an elder and watch as a strip of sinew was twisted into thread. Learning was not a lesson with a start and an end, it was the whole day. Children played at camp jobs. Two small ones might take turns poking a dull stick into wet sand to make holes like a grown person does with an awl. A group might race to spot the first flock of birds at dusk, training eyes to read a sky for signs. They learned to be quiet when the wind changed, and to walk where last night's snow had crusted, so their feet would sink less. They learned to step in the footprints of an adult to save effort on long walks. Simple games had hidden skills. Toss a small bone into a circle of stones from a few strides away, and you learn aim. Balance along a fallen trunk, and you learn to place your feet. Tug at a rope loop with a friend and switch grips on a count, and you learn hand strength and timing. By the age of 5, a child knew which wood burned hot and which smoked. By 8, a child could carry water in a hide bag and not spill. By 10, a child could retouch a dull flake with a tiny punch and a pebble. By early teens, a young person could keep a steady pace beside adults on a half-day walk and bring back wood on a back frame. They were not pushed into hunts before they were ready. First, they followed at a distance with an elder who whispered where to look, how to feel wind on the cheek, how to spot old tracks from new. A wooden spear was a tool to lift and carry, not to throw, so your arms and back learned the weight. When a kill was made, young hands helped with tasks that built skill and respect. Hold the leg while a tendon is cut. Keep the hide clean. Carry fat in a bowl. Fetch more hot stones for the pot. Elders told stories while hands worked. The best story is a map that fits in the mind. When you hear of the beech grove that keeps dry leaves under snow, you are learning where fuel will be in February. When you hear of a stag that doubled back on a slope where the wind swirls, you are learning what animals do when scared. Children also saw care up close. When someone was hurt, the pace of the band matched the slowest walker. The young learned to give and to hold back their own needs when a cold night and a cough meant a quiet camp. By late teens, a Neanderthal was an adult in truth, strong, calm, able to keep a fire in sleet, to carry a burden without waste, to read land, sky, and ice, and to teach a smaller hand how to do the same. This long, gentle making of a hunter and maker did not need words like school or lesson, yet it made experts who could meet winter with a steady face. In a world of long winters, warmth is not luck. It is a set of small, sure steps made each day. Neanderthals dressed in layers. Closest to the skin was a soft hide with the smooth side in, tied with strips that did not cut the flesh. Over that came fur with the hair side in when it was bitter cold, or out when wind cut and snow fell. A belt of twisted sinew held tools and tied the layers at the waist, so heat did not escape. For feet there were soft boots with grass packed between layers to trap air and keep toes dry. Hands wore mitts that hung on cords round the neck when work needed bare fingers. Hoods and caps kept heat from leaving the head. All this gear took work. Hides had to be scraped fresh while still warm, then softened with fat, smoke, and patient hands. Holes were made with bone awls. Seams were pulled tight with sinew that shrank as it dried, so no gap let in wind. Repair was constant. A broken lace, a cut seam, a worn patch at the knee, all were fixed by firelight with a bone needle. Bedding turned a cold floor into a safe place. Evergreen boughs made a springy base that trapped air and kept bodies off stone. Over that went hides, fur side down for grip. Top covers were heavy and wide so 2 or 3 could share heat. Babies and elders slept in the warm center. In caves, bedding lay where smoke rose away and draft did not reach. In open camps, low windbreaks were set to block the worst gusts and to catch morning sun. A shelter could be a rock ledge with hides as a front, a ring of poles and bones with skins over them, or a snow wall against which hides were hung. The shape was simple, low, tight, and warm. Fire sat where smoke found a path out. A trench near the fire edge caught grease and kept sparks from rolling into bedding. Outside, wood was stacked under a simple lean-to so it stayed dry. Inside, tools had spots. Blades and cores lay on a flat stone. Awls stood tipped down in a small basket. A water bag hung from a peg. This order saved time when hands were numb and light was low. Warmth did not come only from clothes and beds. Warmth came from food full of fat, from hot broth held long in the mouth, from steady work that moved blood but did not sweat clothes wet. Warmth came from knowing when to add a layer and when to open a seam to let steam out so frost would not form inside a boot. It also came from how people shared. A strong person took the windy side on a march. The one with the best lungs broke trail in deep snow, then fell back to rest while another took the lead. The group kept a pace that matched the slowest good pace, so no one sweated and then froze. In this way, a band made its own weather. Inside the circle of light, it was always warmer than outside, and the memory of that calm warmth is part of why those places still feel human to us when we stand in them today. Neanderthals did not have maps, but they moved as if the land itself was a map they could read without a line drawn. Their roads were animal paths, river margins, ridgelines that stayed dry, and passes where wind kept snow thin. They knew which valley held fog in autumn and which held sun. They knew where flint and chert lay in layers, and where frost cracked bedrock free each spring. When they walked out to fetch good stone, they did not bring back waste. They shaped a raw block at the source into a prepared core that could ride light in a hide bag and still hold many future flakes inside. Along the way, old camps served as waypoints. A flat stone under a ledge held a spare scraper. A notch in a dead tree marked a turn toward a river bend. Fresh breaks in that notch told you a cousin band had passed by not long ago. In some regions, stones from far away show that bands traded, or at least met and exchanged. A shell from a warm coast lies in a high cave far inland. A kind of flint that belongs to a mountain a week's walk to the east sits in a western site. These are small signs of wide ties. Travel was planned around seasons. In spring, meltwater made streams wild, so you crossed at known fords where a gravel bar rose. In summer, insects swarmed near slow water, so you camped where a breeze flowed. In autumn, rivers shrank and gave up fish. In winter, ice made new bridges, but also new traps, so a walker learned to read sound underfoot and the color of ice near a bend. Loads rode on backs in simple frames made from bent wood and thongs. A bundle might hold a child, hides, cores of stone, and a bag of dried meat and fat. The pace was set by the day's light and the strength of the group. A half-day march, a warm meal at noon if fuel was near, a short push to a chosen rise before dusk. Camps were reused, leaving soft floors of trampled earth. You knew a place by how light fell on the far cliff in late day, by the line of an old hearth, by a stain on rock where smoke had licked for years. When bands met, they likely shared news in simple words and signs. Herds moved early. Ice had taken a crossing. A cave roof had fallen after heavy rain. News of mates moved too. Small bands needed fresh ties. This did not mean a great market. It meant quiet meetings at the edges of ranges, gifts of meat or stone, the borrowing of a skill, the naming of a child born in late winter. These roads without signs were strong because they were made by memory and renewed by feet year after year. When we find the same shelter used across centuries, we are looking at a node in a network that had no lines on paper, yet held together as well as our best maps hold together now. Stone and bone tell of work, but small traces tell of meaning. In some Neanderthal sites, red ochre and black manganese show up not only where hides were treated, but also on shells and on bird bones. Eagle talons with cut and polish marks suggest they hung on a cord and tapped against skin as someone moved. A shell with a hole and a smear of red shows it once hung bright on a chest or wrist. Feathers from large birds were cut in ways that keep only the glossy flight quills, which do little for warmth but much for look. In one deep cave far from daylight, broken stalagmites were stacked into rings near a small hearth long before our kind reached the area. Firelight there would have caught wet stone and made it shine. To walk so far in, to build a shape, and to sit by a low flame in the dark is not a thing you do only for warmth. It is a choice that says the place matters. On rock walls near living areas, we sometimes see simple grooves and hash marks cut into soft stone. They are not pictures of animals, but they are regular. They may be counts, tallies of hunts, or marks to teach a child a line and a curve. Pigments ground on stones and kept in lumps can serve craft, but they also serve body and object. A face striped black and red is not warmer, but it may be braver, calmer, or marked for a moment. In burials, the body is sometimes placed with care, head on a stone, limbs set, a light scatter of red dust near bones. It is not every place and every time, but enough to tell us they had ways to say farewell. Meaning also sits in order. A hearth with neat edges and a clean floor tells that people wanted a tidy circle to sit in. A cache of points all set in the same direction tells of a mind that liked alignment. A line of small stones along a hide edge may have been weights to keep a seam straight as it dried. Even the choice to sit and shave a piece of antler into a smooth shape that fits the hand when a rough one would do shows care for form. We do not need to decide if this is art in the way a museum uses the word. We can simply say they cared how things looked and felt. They used colour by choice. They wore the land on their bodies as shells, claws and feathers. They entered deep places and made shapes by firelight. They gave their dead more than a drop. That is enough to mark a people with a sense that life is not only tasks, but also signs, bonds, and moments that deserve a mark in colour, in stone, or in the quiet hush of a cave where light breathes on rock like a slow heart. Neanderthals lived hard lives, but their bones show more than damage. They show repair, patience, and skilled care. Many skeletons carry the marks of injuries that would sideline anyone for weeks. Broken ribs, smashed forearms, dislocated shoulders, deep cuts that nicked bone. The famous elder from Shanidar Cave had a withered arm, a crushed foot, and likely one blind eye, yet he lived for years. That survival means others slowed their pace, shared food, kept him warm, and guarded the cave mouth at night. Teeth are a diary of stress and diet. Thin lines in enamel show fevers or hunger in childhood that the child survived. Heavy wear on front teeth shows hides clamped and worked for hours, a kind of hand-to-mouth tool use. Hardened plaque preserves tiny bits of what they ate and hints at simple remedies. In some mouths from Spain, scientists found traces of bitter plants and even fungi that today we know carry pain-dulling or germ-fighting compounds. It does not prove a pharmacy, but it suggests elders knew which twigs to chew when a tooth throbbed or a belly churned. Smoke coated cave ceilings and settled in lungs. Wide chests and big sinuses helped move air, but coughs and infections were part of winter life. Ear infections likely flared in damp seasons. A child's cry in the night would bring a warm cloth, a change of sleeping spot, a bit of steam from a pot near the coals. Cuts were cleaned with hot water and bound with sinew and clean hide. Fire heated a bone needle to seal fibers and kill rot. Diet was meat-rich in many places, which fed muscle and repair, but they added plants, nuts and marrow fat to balance the cold. The arm and leg bones of adults show thick ridges where muscle pulled not only from genes, but from a daily training plan written by life. Haul wood, carry water, climb slopes, drag quarters of meat. Spine wear tells of loads on the back and many miles. Yet those same bones show a return to work after injury, a mark of healing weeks by the fire with broth and watchful hands. Health also meant sanitation and order. Hearths were kept neat. Waste was carried outside camp or buried downwind. Bedding was aired when the sun was bright and the wind was kind. Water was drawn upstream of butchering spots. These quiet habits do not fossilize, but the clean layers between ash beds and the way sleeping areas were set away from butchering zones tell us care was a rule, not a guess. Courage for them was not only to face a bison, it was to lift a hurt friend, to walk slower for a month, to keep a pot simmering through sleet, and to believe that one more sunrise could set a bone well enough for the hunt to welcome another spear. Neanderthals shared their world with great herds and strong rivals. Reindeer striped the steppe in long lines that moved like rivers. Bison faced winter with heavy heads and sudden turns. Horses cropped short grass and bolted at the flash of a sleeve. Cave lions, hyenas, wolves, and bears hunted the same ground. To live here, you learned a language of signs that had no words. Cloud bellies told of snow by afternoon. A faint silver on a river bend meant thin ice. A drift that rang hollow underfoot warned of a void. A line of ptarmigan moving suddenly into a gully meant a hawk had taken height. A hawk that found them might also lead a hunter's eye to the small ridges that kept wind off tracks. On south slopes, crust broke later in the day, so a herd would try those first. In wind-scoured saddles, animals crossed and left clean prints. In deep shade, a dusting of snow hid traps and holes, so the lead walker felt with a stick at each step when carrying a child. Neanderthals used the shape of land as if it were a set of tools. A narrow pass became a gate for a drive. A shallow bay on a big river became a fish corral when drives of stone sent shoals toward waiting hands and woven hurdles. A cliff edge gave a clear line to watch for predators at dusk. Travel itself was a skill shaped by the year. In spring they followed green up, when new shoots rose on sunny banks. In summer they moved lighter and met cousins on wide flats to share news and mates. In autumn they took the fat of deer and dried it, set caches, and gathered dry wood under ledges for the worst weeks. In winter they shrank their circle, kept trails packed between hearth, woodpile, and latrine, and saved breath by stepping in each other's prints. They knew the sky by season. No need for star stories to cross a pass. The wind, the crust, and the smell of snow told the time to go or to stay. Predators were rivals and teachers. Wolves tested a herd first at the edges. People watched wolves to read a herd's mood. Hyenas laughed at night when bones were plentiful. Their silence said the plain was empty. Bears owned caves when leaves fell. A wise band left certain caves alone then, or claimed the entrance early with bright fire and many voices. In this world, strength was not only muscle and spear, it was the steady habit of seeing. It was waking, stepping out, tasting the air, touching the snow, and knowing at once whether today was for travel, for waiting, for stalking, or for working hides by the hearth, while the storm wrote its short history across the mouth of the cave. When modern humans spread into the lands of Neanderthals, the meeting was not a single clash, but many crossings. Valleys held the quiet work of joint hunts and shared fires, but also the strain of two expert peoples using the same prey and the same shelters. We see hints of difference in gear and networks. Our species often carried lighter points made from long blades struck from prepared cores in a new way, and sometimes used bone and antler for fine barbs and smooth needles that could stitch tight seams. Neanderthals already made fine stone points and strong spears and knew how to glue and bind them. Where groups lived near each other, styles mixed. A Neanderthal scraper sits beside a modern human blade at one layer, and at another a bone point lies near a classic Neanderthal hearth. That is not a simple replacement, it is a frontier where methods travelled faster than people did. Modern human bands seem to have linked wider trading webs, shown by shells and pigments that moved far inland, and perhaps could draw help from a larger circle in harsh years. Neanderthal groups, often smaller and more widely spaced, managed risk with deep local knowledge and tough bodies that could close with prey. Both ways work, but they carry different costs. A blade that flies true from farther back keeps you safer in a crowded hunt. A thrusting spear and a strong arm bring meat when the wind and ground let you close. Most days, the land chose which plan fit. Some scholars think our bands changed faster because we shared ideas across bigger distances and kept larger gatherings where songs, mates, and methods flowed. Neanderthal bands met too and traded stone, news, and people, but their numbers were fewer, and when climates swung sharp, their thin web tore more easily. Yet the edge between us and them was not a wall. Children were born between the two groups. Bits of their DNA rest in people today. A tool made by one hand fit the grip of the other. Fire warmed both kinds of face the same way. It is easy to tell a story with one winner. The ground tells a quieter tale of long overlap, shared valleys, copied tricks, and many small chances that, added together, gave our kind a slightly wider net and a slightly longer reach when hard years came one after another. The edge between us and them was not about who was human. Both were. It was about which mix of body, tool, number, and network bent, but did not break when ice, drought, and change arrived close together. The first Neanderthal genome, and the ones that followed, opened a door into a past we cannot watch. From these sequences we learned that people outside Africa carry a small share of Neanderthal DNA, usually 1 to 2%, a sign of old unions in the lands where the two peoples met. Those bits are not random. Many sit in genes that shape skin and hair, the outer layers that meet cold, dry air, low winter sun, and new microbes. Some sit in immune tools that help the body spot and fight strange germs, handy when our kind walked into lands full of animals, waters, and soils our ancestors had never touched. A few touch how fat is stored and burned, which can help in long winters when food comes in bursts. Other regions show the opposite, long deserts where almost no Neanderthal DNA remains, as if natural selection scrubbed them away because they did not fit our wiring or our children's health. This mix tells a fair story. We shared enough to have children, and some of their traits helped our lines in new climates, but we were also different enough that many imported parts did not play well in our setup and were slowly removed. Their own genomes show small population sizes and long periods where bands were thin and inbreeding rose, especially in the Far East. That makes a group more fragile to disease and change. The genes also fit what bones hint at. Strong bodies, broad chests, and noses likely tuned to cold, dry air. They carried, like us, the core tools of life, the genetic code, the machines that read it, the energy wheels in cells. And they carried, like us, signals that support speech and brain wiring for complex learning. When we speak of their DNA in us, it is not a ghost story, it is today. Certain immune defenses respond as they do, in part because of those old unions. Some skin and hair traits in northern peoples carry that echo. Even the way some of us react to long winter nights and short days may hold small influences. None of this makes anyone more or less human. It simply shows that deep time wrote in us with many hands, and one of those hands was Neanderthal. Their genomes also hint at spread and meeting beyond Europe, with cousins in the east called Denisovans, whose DNA still rides in some people today, especially in the Pacific and parts of Asia. That wider net shows that many humankinds met, mixed a little, learned, and moved on. The picture that emerges is not tidy. It is alive, like a map of rivers that split and rejoin. We are one branch of that river. Neanderthals were another. The water mingled. No single blow ended the Neanderthals, their fading looks like many small cuts during a time of sharp swings. Climate lurched from cold to less cold and back again in a few human lifetimes. Forests retreated, steppes spread, then closed again. Herd paths changed, and old hunting grounds went quiet. For a people spread thin, each swing cost births, not only lives. Bands split and could not find mates outside their kin. Some winters stacked up with poor hunts. Fires burned low to save wood. Illness moved along valleys when bands met. In a few regions, a large volcanic blast spread ash and chill for a time, adding stress to already tight years. Meanwhile, our kind arrived in waves. We travelled light, linked wider ties, and sometimes kept distance throws that made hunting a little safer in tight spots. We brought new germs and we caught theirs, and both sides paid prices. We copied their good tricks and they copied ours, but numbers matter when the ground is harsh. A group that drops from 50 to 30 and cannot meet neighbours to trade mates and skills can fold even if it is full of brave hearts. Over thousands of years, this slow loss looks like a fade on the map. Caves go quiet one by one. Fire ash ends a little lower in the pile. Tools of one kind give way to another. Yet even as a distinct people, they did not vanish without a mark. Pieces of their DNA stayed with us. Their shelters, hearths, and tools trained our eyes to see what a good camp is. Their ranges and ours overlapped for long enough that ideas blended. It is tempting to look for a single cause because single causes make sharp stories. The ground resists that. It gives a patient picture of small bands working hard, meeting cousins and strangers, lifting children and elders, riding the year, as well as any people can. And then, when too many cold turns came close together, slipping below the line where a culture can renew itself. It is not a tale of defeat by fools. It is a tale of a thin web stretched over a rough world until threads broke faster than hands could tie them. Respect is the right response. Hold a simple image as we end. A ring of stones around a low fire. Hides hung to dull the wind. The smell of pine and smoke. A child asleep between elders. Outside, snow creaks under stars. In the red light you see hands pass a bone awl, hands flip a strip of meat, hands test a spear point and nod. These people are Neanderthals. They are human in every way that matters. Minds that plan and teach, bodies strong from honest work, hearts that keep a group together through winter after winter. They read land the way we read words. They built warmth layer by layer with wood, glue, thread, and order. They hunted with nerve and skill, cooked with care, healed the hurt, and gave meaning to life with colour, ornaments, and a choice to go deep into the earth and light a small fire in the dark. They met people like us, shared children, shared ideas, and then, across many seasons, grew fewer until their fires were no longer seen. Yet they are not gone. A little of their blood walks in many of us. Much of their craft sits in our hands when we tie a clean knot, keep a tidy hearth, or read a track in wet ground. Their story is not a warning, it is a gift. Proof that strength can be calm, that courage can be quiet, that a people can hold to a hard land for hundreds of thousands of years, by skill and care more than by noise. If your eyes are heavy now, let that ring of stones glow softer. Let the breath of the sleepers slow. Outside, the wind keeps its own watch. Inside, the coals keep theirs. Thank you for listening. Good night.